Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have from Central Florida as well, RDV, and of course from the Great Midwest, RDV, and then I have RDV3, aka Professor Pixel, who's from Florida. So, guys, I fucked all that up. That being said, the movie we're talking about tonight.
Why am I?
Shush, young one. Respect your elders, because when you don't respect your elders and you fuck up something in the beginning, like this movie Dracula Untold, you go, holy shit, I'm going to pay attention and see what's going on, because tonight's movie Dracula Untold with Luke Evans really is an interesting, different take, somewhat original on the whole Dracula story that's in the public domain. And that being said, while it didn't maybe do as well as what the studios would like, I think it's everything that Universal and everybody wanted out of the so-called dark universe, an action / comic book movie rather than a serious horror one. And RDV, you and I have talked about this before, about why some things work and why they don't when it comes to horror versus action, and of course comic book movies that dominate the current landscape. But overall, if you actually watch Dracula Untold, I think it's almost at the same level, maybe a 1A, 1B comparison between this and, say, what I think is one of the best action type horror movies of all time. And that would be, of course, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, which is tremendously enjoyable to me. Dracula Untold fucking kicks ass. This is a fun film. RDV, you know I've talked about this one forever, that we wanted to do this here. Let me start with you, and then we'll go to Pixel about Dracula Untold. What was your initial take on this film?
When I first heard about this, I mean, I saw like the ending as far as the very epilogue part.
Yep.
So it's all I've seen. Someone leaked it to me. And I was like, okay. I'm curious. Are they gonna romance Dracula in this? You know, or is even gonna be a Dracula? I was glad when I actually started watching it, how much fun it is. And I'm just thinking, where's the video game? I want the hack / video game. I want that.
Luke Evans is a strong father figure in this film,
and that's the thing.
Seriously.
I love Luke Evans, because Luke Evans being in the Hobbits and all, and he's pretty much in every movie there is. Pretty much, you think about coming out in the past 10, 15 years. You had Dominic Cooper, who's been in other things too as well. But like, we reviewed Anna, he was in there too.
Yep.
The Beauty and the Beast, apparently was in there too. Fast and Furious 6. I mean, like Luke Evans is in everything. And Dominic Cooper, like looking at him, he's a Preacher. He's also Need for Speed. He was the villain. You know, it's like I said, like, they had a good cast in here, and like Charles Dance of all people playing the old guy in here, and like Last Action Hero, The Golden Child, Game of Thrones, Alien 3. It's The Sandman recently. You had a good cast, and unlike most of the movies today, they actually like followed through and stuck with one plot. They didn't try to throw multiple stories in their angles. Like, it is an action romance / I guess not really horror, but more like horrific acts are in there. I mean, as far as with the vampire,
yep.
But like I said, overall, Luke Evans, strong performance. He is actually the best character on all the Lord of the Rings characters.
Pixel, we talk sometimes, RDV and I, about, especially when we do our 80s action type films, about certain roles of masculinity, femininity, and all that, and how they mean it. And you and I just got through doing a quick live review of Halloween Ends, and I described it as an emo romance with Frank Hardy going serial killer, allegedly, and the psychological part to it. So it's a very interesting discussion, albeit a short one. When I look at Dracula Untold and Luke Evans, who's openly gay, I looked at him this whole film and went, I don't care. He does the role so well and believable that, to me, it's not campy at all. And you and I have some serious disagreements on certain older films like The Thing that we'll be diving into at some point here. So I'm curious, as your first viewing for Dracula Untold, what did you think of Luke Evans' performance and just this movie in general?
I didn't know he was gay.
He comes across as very masculine. Like, you go, hey, that's a motherfucker I can believe in, as a guy that's getting shit done. And that's why in Halloween Ends, Frank Hardy, he turned out to be pretty cool too. We saw the transformation.
So I'm going to say here, I didn't know what exactly to expect. We've obviously seen quite a few Draculas at this point. But with this one, Dracula Untold, I didn't know. I didn't know what I was going into. It was so fucking cool. Like, unbelievably cool. And it's I don't get how this movie is favored so poorly. Because it's different. Yeah, it's not Dracula being, oh, I'm going to take your girlfriend.
I'm about to
No.
suck your blood.
So,
No,
so he
none of that
just
shit.
wants. He's simply a man with with his wife and his son, and he gets into a position in which he does get the strength of a vampire, but he has this looming. If he gives into drinking human blood, then he'll free his sire, and it has this element to it that's just so interesting. I didn't expect it going in. So watching as he takes this role, it's obviously not Count Dracula, but it's good. It's genuinely good.
It's the origin story. That's what makes it so much better versus just or other having Dracula you don't know anything about his life. It shows you how the sacrifice this guy did for his family.
Yes.
And that's the best thing you can see in a movie. Now, if somebody actually sacrifices their life for somebody else, you know, I love that.
Well,
You know,
well, the other thing
sad.
too I wanted to mention, RDV, because you had brought this up before when we talked about how there's a lack of positivity in certain movies, especially with father figures, is that, you know, I think one of the main arguments I bring up for a perspective when we discuss films, most of them is that if you don't have somebody you can root for, or at least understand, it's hard to get hooked into a film, or despite how well it may be. If you can't root for somebody, what fun is there in that? And I think, again, mentioning Halloween Ends that we just recently covered a few moments ago, check that out. It's a quick review. I like how they set it up because it makes sense once you get about 10 minutes in the movie what's happening. And here we find out within like 5 minutes what the setup is. We see the struggle that he has to go through. And like Halloween Ends, RDB, I know that you hadn't seen it yet. There's a religious element to it here where you could argue about what the foreign invading force represents. And I'll simply say that there's a guy that has to make a choice. So it's almost like, you know, a Christian thing here too. He's got to die for his people. And we find out how quickly his people don't want to be supportive for him if he's not one of theirs, because they turn on him in this scene that makes me kind of laugh. But I think this movie did a great job that unfortunately Tom Cruise was not able to capture with The Mummy. And that's, we cared for him right off the bat. We see his torment. We see his anguish, something that a human goes through, and we see that he's willing to pay, you know, the ultimate price, as it were, for it. And it sounds hokey, it sounds a little better, but gosh dang it, RDV, after all the emo crap that happened in the 90s with serial killers being sexualized and 150-pound vampires that we can't buy in, I thought Luke Evans really brought it here too. And you've talked about positivity and all that here. Talk about some of the action in CGI, because I think the use of it was done well, even though I'm not crazy about CGI.
The action in CGI, we all know that Dracula turns into a bat. And this, you're like, no, he turns into many bats when he moves fast. And I think that's a good element to have. I mean, obviously we've seen stuff like this over for those who played the games like Castlevania and stuff like this. This was kind of in those lines, you know. Like I said, the whole thing is that you had someone to root for. You felt bad for this guy. This guy sacrificed his life, and then when people found out that he's a vampire, like, oh, they turned on him. It's like, you stingy little bastards. He should have let you die. Instead, like, you know, this is a guy who gave up everything, his mortal soul, to spare the innocents. He didn't. His fathers before him, you know, and his grandfather, they would just give to the, I guess, what was it, the Romans? Or no, the Turks, right? That's what, the Turkish.
Yeah.
They had to give them, their boys up for slavery. And it's like, and he said, no more of this crap. And the guy, especially when he loses his wife towards the end, she gets knocked off the cliff. He tries to save her. Dude, I'm thinking like,
been dead down there.
No, hold on. Because I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, because he's got everything. You know, his wife's alive, his son's protected. As soon as she's dead, everyone's fucked. Pretty much. So I want to point out, though, I know we really love this movie. Do you know the guys who wrote this? Also wrote Morbius. It's Morbin time, bro.
Let me say this. Let me ask you guys what you think about this. Okay, that's an in joke. I know he's needling you, but think about this for a second. I don't know why, but recently we had covered Highlander here on the Xtreme Movie Show, and I got to sit there and say,
Immortality.
true, but I for some reason, as cheesy it is, what Highlander goes through with his wife kind of gets me a little bit. This one is cheesy, not nearly as good, but we know that when she dies at the end, she's going to like say, you know, take my blood, do it, save our son, you know, and all that kind of stuff. She's not the nagging whatever and all that too, but it's basically her win Rocky speech to him, because you can see he really doesn't want to do it. Everybody's fucked him. He just wants to save their son. I'm feeling for this guy. It's working for me. Did you guys like that, or was that just like, oh my god, this is so hokey?
Like I said, all the way through. I mean, whatever Luke Evans' character he plays, he always plays a strong, manly guy, you know. And like I said, just because you're a man doesn't mean you're without emotion.
Exactly.
You know? And that's go ahead, Dracula.
Yeah, no, I'm going to say she shouldn't have been alive at the bottom of the cliff.
Yeah, that was kind of dumb.
Like my obviously, I'm watching a movie about a guy that can transform into mini bats and has this curse that will only come if he drinks blood. But at the same time, she fell. It was right there. There was no saving her. And she falls and she's still talking. Oh, no, she should have been a stain on the ground.
Yeah, yes, I agree.
But with actually her saying, you gotta do it. Save our boy. Yeah, no, I feel it. I get what they were going for. And I think that that's truly where this falls apart for many people. They just didn't like what they were going for. And that's their flaw.
And I mean, there's nothing wrong with a hokey love story, because, you know, if they're written well, whether a guy or a girl, if you can appreciate a good story, I mean, like it's kind of believable. In this, I mean, they could have went as far as the Highlander routes.
Yeah,
watching her old age out and watching his son age out too, and like that would have been much more heartbreaking, and that would have been a much more longer movie. This was kind of like because remember, these guys wrote Gods. Was it the Gods of Egypt too? They wrote this too. So as you get the whole sense of this movie, like I felt like I was watching kind of like Dracula, but also the 300 with one guy just taking out a bunch of guys. I said overall, I said the movie is great. Yes, she shouldn't have said anything at all. At the end, what she should have done, he said after she splats, he should have went over and just fed on people.
Start licking the puddle.
No, he should have just went and started running from each guy and biting their necks, feeding on them, and then going on. Just lose all sense of rationality until he comes to his son, and his son's actually ones that brings him back to the brink.
You know, one of the greatest star-crossed romance movies of the 90s is, of course, Fear with Marky Mark, which is tremendous.
Let me in.
And I exactly, and I couldn't help but think in this movie, okay, we see what he has to go through here and all that, but I want to switch gears because honestly I could care less about the action in here. I really don't. It means nothing to me. There's two things that I wanted to bring up scene-wise that I thought were fantastic, and the rest of me is fair game. I'll mention one, and then I'll ask you guys about the second. The first thing is one of my favorite scenes in this film. And when I watched it again, I went, damn, I really like how they did the Predator vision.
Yeah.
But I really like the transformation scene where after he makes the deal with the devil, so to speak, and he wakes up in the river and he just realizes that he's superhuman. It was a great scene. We see, and that's what film should be, we see what he's become. I thought that was great. But that leads me to the second thing I wanted to ask you guys about, because I know this is probably more of an action movie than a horror movie, and unfortunately I think it's that way, and I think this is what Universal wanted. It's not what I wanted. RDV, you and I had talked about The Wolfman with Benicio del Toro. Loved it a lot. Wish it was just more straight up horror than action. That being said, I think both films are really good, and I was really hoping we'd get that with The Mummy, and of course that fucked everything. Maybe The Invisible Man will change things because that did well, and I like that. But how fucking good is Vance in here as that bad guy? Holy shit, he creeped the fuck out of me. This is like Salem's Lot TV movie, disgusting looking. He was phenomenal.
Oh, definitely. I kept getting like Nosferatu, whatever it's called, Nosferatu. I can't pronounce it,
Nah,
but you know what I'm talking about though.
Nosferatu.
Yeah, he is. When you hear the backstory from the guy, like I was talking to the priest or something, you telling her the backstory, telling the lore about the guy made a deal with a demon for power, and then it basically tricked him and turned him into this monster, and he's stuck in the cave. So the first time when they meet him, though, it was really cool because they're like they find the helmet down there in the river, same river where he woke up after the transformation. So they found the helmet. He goes to the it must be the what's it called, Bone Cave or whatever mountain. Bone Crush. Yeah. They go in there and like the guys in there and like, oh, is it to see the bats come out? Which is your first kind of guess your jump scare. They go in there, guys like, I was like, I'm not going in there if they're coming in there. It's like, and then you see the predator vision. You don't even see the monster, you hear the growling. You see the guy gets taken, and then the other guy runs, he gets taken, and then only reason he survives because he's by the sunlight. That was cool.
Yes.
The whole scenery, the shadowing, but later on, like when after the transform, he goes in and starts talking to Charles Vance one-on-one. You see him more, and you see everything. You see finally he crushes the skull, and he bites. He's like basically like this guy is very demonic, and I love the fact that they kind of kept it to that. Not too much CG, but overall,
yeah,
like I said,
the shadows, it was great.
I said overall. Lance's performance in this is phenomenal. Him, just the way he talks, the way he acts. He's got Luke Evans by the throat. He's like, "You land me again, I'll kill you. I'll just drain you." And then you see him. He like cuts his throat a little bit, and then his tongue comes out nasty, and like I'm like, "What the heck?" He just licks him and like his throat, and then like I said, that was a very intense scene. Overall, I forget that the tongue's even CG at that point. I'm just thinking like, this is nasty. You see the saliva on that thing, and like, if he doesn't turn him, he'll die from all the infections from that guy's tongue.
There's just something primal about it, and like I say, with attention spans, or for whatever reason, the comic book audience that's out there today with a lot of films, they feel the need that, we gotta just have a big action sequence. Like you said, there's been a lot of reboots, and a lot of them have flopped. Gods of Egypt, Clash of the Titans, whatever. I mean, there's a way to do a spectacle, but this movie doesn't necessarily benefit from it. It's there, but you're like, holy crap.
Yeah, my only complaint is the only kind of gore you kind of see in this movie is when he cuts the guy's arms off with a sword. I mean, like, and then he becomes like that. It's only a flesh wound. The Black Knight from Monty Python. But I mean, after watching, Pixel and I had a reviewed on the Geeky Puppet Show. We basically reviewed, what's it called? Castlevania, which is on Netflix. And that, if you watch that is just almost in a sense, almost like a gothic kind of like romance kind of comedy a little bit. And then the gore, when the vampires just slaughter people, their heads are being sliced in half, ripped apart, eyes bulging, all that stuff. So I was going, after watching that, I'm like, okay, where's the gore? Where's the gore? He's got all this power. I'm thinking like he just flies back. And then what pissed me off the most, though, that's the only thing that pissed me off, is the sword reflection thing during the first battle. So the point, the guy, he got stabbed and he's falling, he's looking, and you see he's watching the sword behind him, and you see Luke Evans, because they look exactly freaking the same. But I was thinking like, okay, I would have loved to see more of that, but they had to cut back because of the CG. They couldn't show all that. But I'm thinking like, these are the guys who make The Last Witcher, the one with Vin Diesel. They did that later on after Gods of Egypt. And I gotta say, like, the writing of the story, some of the special effects, and just the fact, it's what's gonna happen, but you stick with the movie. Someone's gonna, either his wife's gonna die or his kid's gonna die, and this guy's gonna snap. And you're just rooting for Dominic Cooper to get his head ripped off, or skull. I'm just waiting for that to crush, because he crushed the stone when he first came out after turning. Mm-hmm. I just thought he was just gonna squeeze and pop Dominic Cooper's head. That would have been great. But go ahead,
Pixel. One of the things that I had recently talked about in Halloween Ends was whether you like it or not, and trying to stay spoiler free for it so far, is that for Halloween Ends, we talked about the execution of, not necessarily what they chose, but how effective was what they chose to do. And there's a scene in here where they get to the they get to the keep or whatever, pun intended, and he's already turned. He's not trying not to let anybody know, and he's walking around in shadows, and there's not really any CGI, but one guy's kind of watching him. It's kind of a cool scene. We had some of that in Halloween Ends. What did you pick up from this movie as far as what you like or about current films or not? Because I thought that was a pretty good scene.
Well, it doesn't help that Venkman just said that these guys are the writers for Gods of Egypt and Morbius. That's not a good track record, bro.
It is for me. But hater, bro.
Yeah, there's no Morbin time.
Yeah, there's always room for Morbin time and Power Rangers because they did that too.
Oh my gosh, they hired the worst writers in Hollywood history. I understand now.
Well, they wrote this, and then as it went up the years.
Yes, as time went on, because they should have just worked on a sequel to this. This is a promising start of a story. Like, obviously, their whole intention was to continue.
Yep.
Like, that's why they have Charles Dance just there at the end. Look at the camera. Let the games begin. Yes, let them. But no, sadly, this wasn't received well. And I can't understand. I can't understand it. I really can't. Like, I'm trying to process who goes into this movie and walks out and thinks there was nothing redeeming about it. The acting that we got to see, I think it was solid. Yes, that moment that we were talking about before with her on the ground saying, "Suck my blood." It was a little, I think that was a little cheesy, honestly. But that is his moment to break out. He falls into the curse to go ahead and rescue his son. And maybe they don't want a humanization of Dracula. And even with that, though, you're saying that you didn't like anything about this movie? I wish I had somebody here who hated this movie, because I need to see the insight of somebody's mind.
I'll tell you why, Pixel, and then we'll go around with the ending of the movie and our final thoughts, because it's
Sure.
exactly what we brought up with Halloween Ends, and it's this. So Halloween Ends, I'll just say it, it's not a Michael Myers movie. He's in it, but it's not about him. And that's what I think really put people off, not necessarily with how they chose to do it, but people want to see Michael Myers, and it's reduced down to go around and hacking a bunch of people, which it never really what started off that way. And since it's a rebooted trilogy, it's got its own thing to it. You can argue about the merits of the second film on Halloween, but really it's not a Halloween film. It's not. And Dracula Untold is not a Dracula movie. You could argue it's a souped up action comic book type thing with a horror monster and a Dracula, but it's not a Dracula movie either. It's just a convenient setup for this, and it really is, honestly. I think this movie works on this. And this is my final thoughts. We'll go around. I think it comes and goes with starting from right at the beginning. Luke Evans. I think honestly, it's a pretty decent romance family angle. I'm a little sarcastic on this channel, but I sincerely meant that, RDV, when we talked about it at the beginning. And I think it's what they wanted to do. It's PG, CG, crappy violence that's not believable, but it's not the emphasis of the movie. When they make little comments like, well, how do you know something's in there? Because bats don't fly out of the cave, until night, then I'm like, okay, we know what we're getting. It's simple. It's really digested down. It's just a different take on it. But I liked how the universe was going, where you go, wait a minute. Maybe they could set this up to be their action film sequence out of the dark universe, and it'd be Dracula movies, and maybe you do a different type with the Invisible Man, or the different type with the Mummy, or whatever your universe was going to do. I thought they could have made, depending on how they were received, not only all these different tentpole franchises, but different ones. This one could have been more of an action-based one, comic bookish. Another one could have been more romantic. Another one could have been more gothic. They could have had so much they could have done, and they fucked it all up. Because I'm telling you, that's what I think people went into Dracula and told, wow, it's going to be a Dracula. It's got Luke Evans in it, and it's really about hubby save our child. Honestly, and that's it. And it's a comic book movie. It's not a Dracula movie. So Pixel, I think that's why people came at her going, they went in with a preconceived notion of what it's supposed to be, especially with a decade full of, whiny vampires in the 90s and 2000s, that when this movie came out, since it was so different, they went, well, wait a minute, it's like a comic book movie. It's not about Dracula or anything else. Who gives a shit? I think that's why, to be honest with you. Now, let me get your final take, and then we'll go to RDB for his.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say this needs its revival. Luke Evans isn't that old yet. He can go ahead and bring this back.
Absolutely.
But no, I genuinely think that this movie is truly solid. Obviously, it isn't, like we said with Halloween Ends, it's not what you might go in expecting. But I think there is something really here. Like, there's good structure, like we said with the Keep, but that'll come through later.
Dropping later this week, quarter offline, the Keep, a 1980s gem.
Bones here are there for a good story, and to not see it to its completion is just sad. But overall, good movie. If you haven't watched it, you should check it out. Just know what you're going into. This is a lot of fun, and not in the way that, oh, this is bad fun. No, this is genuinely good fun.
RDV, give it to me.
Well, I'll just say this. This movie was actually supposed to, after the fail with the werewolf, this was supposed to be their launching pad, because The Mummy was supposed to come out a year or two later, and then they decided to push that back to 2017 and make that the first movie in the Universal horror movies. So, and that's why at the ending here it's set up so they could have, they're going to have Vlad appear in The Mummy.
Wow.
Well, I was reading the wiki too about how it was being made to tie into the Dark Universe. There were reshoots to tie it in, but it was ultimately supposed, like, it is its own thing. It doesn't need the universe.
No, it doesn't. But I would have loved it. I said, like, I like watching Luke Evans. In the Hobbit movie, I could care less about the Hobbits. When I saw Luke Evans with it, and like he's taking on the dragon, I'm like, this guy's outshining everyone else in the movie. And like I said, he's born to be a leading role. So I was kind of pissed that they didn't do a sequel for this.
Well, he was young enough. You never know. Never say never, especially in this day and age. Especially when there's all these different things getting rebooted. I'm sure in 10 years from now, we'll be talking about the new Halloween trilogy rebooted by somebody who's probably 10 years old right now. Honestly, and it'll be interesting to discuss then, just like this one was now. But by then, I'm sure we'll have a Dracula reboot of some kind, whether it's through Universal or somewhere else. I mean, it's only inevitable, right?
Like I said, I'm just thinking the MCU should just bring him in as a Dracula and call it quits.
What? No.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Dracula Untold starring Luke Evans. Check it out. It definitely is a fun movie. It's worth your time watching it. Is it a Halloween movie? Not really, but it's definitely a different take.
It's the way I describe it.
Mythos.
It's kind of like in a sense of watching the werewolf, Benicio del Toro, or watching what was the other one?
The Howling.
The Howling.
Wolfen. American Werewolf in London.
I'm trying to get there was another movie I'm just trying to think of that was recently came out around this time. Or before this, Sleepy Hollow. In a sense, it's a dark gothic romance movie. Yeah. With action and suspense of gore and horror, perfectly good time to watch it every time around October, especially when if you live up north and you're freezing your ass off. The leaves are flying. You kind of feel like you're there too, because that's cold water. He's basically surrounding himself in, and they go in up in the what's it called, the monastery. Mm-hmm. Towards the end of the mountains. I'm thinking like, yeah, nobody from Florida would survive that.
You're welcome. No, I wouldn't.
You're like, screw this, because they're in Europe. Europe has always been freaking cold anyway. So I mean,
I go to Tennessee every year, bitch.
That's
for the winter and stay there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, why?
Ladies and gentlemen, Dracula Untold. Check it out. We'll be live again on Tuesday night with a movie to be determined shortly, and we'll post up on that what it's going to be. Again, we've got some more slashers coming that we like to have on Slasher Sundays coming out. We're going to be talking about real soon here, Professor Pixel and I, The Blood Splattered Bride. Great title, fun film. Check it out. That way you're ready for it when we do it. And of course, if you have any suggestions, let us know. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for letting people know that we exist and sharing it out, too. That's the greatest gift you give us, besides sharing some time with us on our little reviews on that, too. We really look forward to seeing what thoughts you have in chat, so we can kind of just kind of just talk movies, which is what we do here on Xtreme Movie Show. And of course, I'd like to thank RDB and Professor Pixel for showing up tonight to talk about it. It's always a lot of fun. Have a good night, everybody. Have a safe and happy week. And as always, remember, stay extreme.
Good evening.